Good to be back, Joe.
You helped to drive the 101st Airborne on the march to Baghdad. You led U.S. forces in Afghanistan. And, of course, you know how quickly a situation like this can lead to an occupation and turn into a quagmire. Is it possible for the president to achieve his stated objectives purely from the air?
Well, it is, because he's clarified the stated objectives to not include our forces bringing about regime change, but to creating conditions for a possible political transition. And that is very achievable, as are the other goals. Actually, the White House spokeswoman was correct. I think we're doing very, very well in the military campaign. We obviously had enormous success against the regime leaders very early on. We've largely taken down their air and ballistic missile defenses, so we can fly non-stealthy aircraft, the B-1 and B-2, B-52 bombers, in addition to the B-2 bombers, the stealth aircraft. We are rapidly taking down the missile launchers, missile stockpiles, and even the manufacturing facilities for the missiles, making inroads on the drone threat as well, although that is persistent and challenging. It's what killed our 6 soldiers in Kuwait, after all. Dramatic progress against the Iranian Navy. The vast majority of that is on the bottom of the Gulf. And also any remnants of the nuclear program will be addressed as well during this campaign. I think we will create conditions in which the regime is dramatically weakened. Their command and control is significantly really, I think degraded was probably the right term. You could almost say destroyed. But there's still going to be a very large force of members, of guys with guns, who are going to remain loyal to the regime. And it could be as many as 1 million men under arms. They've shown a willingness to kill their own citizens when they demonstrate against them. Tens of thousands in January alone, and tens of thousands more detained. So the conditions may be there. The question is, will there be an uprising with real combat capability, real leadership, organization, or will it be modest ethnic and sectarian minorities in various parts of the country?
Well, when we are looking at what will happen next, you just outlined a lot of the tactical successes that we've already seen. We heard this week from U.S. officials that this conflict is about to enter into a second phase where we're going to start to see strikes deeper into Iran. From an operational perspective, can you give us some context here? How much more difficult this operation is about to get for U.S. and Israeli forces?
Well, it depends on whether we have completely taken down the air defenses in particular. We certainly have done that in the areas where we're already flying. That's why we have the confidence to fly the non-stealthy B-1 and B-52 bombers. These are the workhorses that we have out there, in addition to still flying the stealth fighter bombers and other assets and using cruise missiles launched from sea or from air outside the theater. So as we go further into the interior of Iran, obviously the distances get greater. You're going to have to refuel perhaps a bit more before you enter the airspace. But it really comes down to whether we have completely taken out the air and ballistic missile defenses. And I think that we either will have by that time, or we will shortly after going into it. The truth is that the most sophisticated air and ballistic missile defense system that Iran had was taken out in the early hours of the 12-day air campaign by the Israelis flying F-35s that we provided to them. This is a Russian system, and Russia has none to spare at this point in time. They can't share or replace that system at all. They're barely able to keep their own systems functional. They're targeted every single day by Ukrainians with drones. So I think this will be, again, longer distance, newer targets, obviously, but very, very doable and also very necessary.
General, this is a conflict that is now involving 12 countries, and there's reporting today by the Washington Post that Russia is now providing targeting information to Iran to help attack Americans. How worried are you about this widening into a larger regional or global conflict?
Well, it's obviously concerning, although it has really backfired on Iran. They, I think, thought that they could conduct horizontal escalation. In other words, not just hit American targets and Israeli targets, but go after the host nation countries and the rest of this, and hitting civilian, a hotel, for example, a seaport, an airport, French naval base, and a variety of other, a number of energy facilities also in the region, thinking that that would bring pressure from those countries on the U.S. to wrap it up. That has not happened. And in fact, if anything, those countries are now against Iran instead of taking a knee. And we may see some of them do more than just integrate their air and ballistic missile defenses with those of the U.S. and also of Israel. The Russian provision of intelligence is, in a way, predictable but very concerning. Without this, they would not have the precision that they apparently do have to conduct missile and drone strikes, noting that, yes, the missile program has been dramatically degraded. As I mentioned earlier, the launchers, the stockpiles, and even now the manufacturing facilities are being taken down systematically. But the drones, again, still a problem as well. And of course, there's a little bit of something called missile math here now, and that gets a bit concerning as you go on. We're constantly calculating how many interceptors do we have left for our Patriot system, the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System, the THAAD system, and then also the SM-3. These are the Patriot-like system, if you will, on our destroyers, and together with those of our, again, partners and allies in the region. That's all integrated in a seamless system. Everyone has the same air picture and the rest of this. But keep in mind, we produced maybe 620 or so Patriots last year. That was a dramatic increase over previous years because we were providing them to Ukraine, building up in the Indo-Pacific, used a number of them during the 12-day air campaign last summer. And you can do the math. We know essentially how many missiles have been coming. There's pretty granular detail. And there is a point at which you start to get a bit worried about how many missiles do they have left and how many interceptors do we have left, especially if you're shooting two to get one. Oftentimes, if you're comfortable with the missile math, you'll shoot two interceptors to take down one missile. I'm not sure whether that is going to continue to be possible given the numbers on each side. So that's something that has to be kept in mind. Look, the reason the president called the heads of these different defense industrial corporations together today is to exhort them to dramatically increase production of the Patriots, THAAD, SM-3 specifically, but then a number of other aspects as well. Keep in mind that Ukraine this year, I was just there about 4 or 5 weeks ago, the manufacturers of the drones there say that collectively they will make 7 million drones this year. They're already throwing 10,000 a day at the Russians in various forms, suicide drones, surveillance, bomber drones, etc. We produce probably 400,000 until we really ramp that up. And by the way, the Ukrainians produce them at a much lower cost and generally are more effective because they're changing the software every week or two and the hardware every several weeks. But this effort to rebuild our military industrial complex is imperative in the United States if we're to be ready for the wars of the future.
Well, I'm glad that you brought that up, General. In the final minute we have you, we do a lot of reporting here at Bloomberg about revitalizing the defense industrial base. To meet the goals that you just outlined, what sort of timeline are we looking at? Is there enough resources to push this along fast enough to give the U.S. that advantage to bolster our weapon stockpiles?
Well, we're going to have to dramatically increase our industrial capacity. That effort really has been going on. To be fair, it was started under the previous administration where there was a recognition that the consumption rates for our Ukrainian partners are vastly greater for heavy artillery, for a number of the other munitions that we were provided, and so forth. And so that was the early catalyst to expand this. And now I'm delighted to see, pleased to see that the president is calling them together and really encouraging that we get on with it. By the way, we also have to transform our forces. We need to change our very concepts of war to recognize what is going on in Ukraine, where you're essentially seeing unmanned systems, not just in the air, but also at sea and on the ground, doing combat with each other. Yes, there are humans on that battlefield still, but tanks cannot cannot survive anymore, nor can infantry fighting vehicles. It's 3 Russians running across the street with a drone providing air cover. We have to change our very doctrine, and then we have to dramatically change what it is that we're buying and also how we buy it. It needs to be updated constantly, not, you say, 1 million of exactly this over the next 4 years.